one knew the man he was going to kill. They lived in different towns, no different from millions of other Americans. Had his home in a suburb, no different from hundreds of other suburbs. He worked in a modern decentralized industrial plant, and his hobby was fishing. Future victim was a salesman who traveled a good deal. Mr. B's home was in a town some 500 miles away. Come into Mr. A's orbit were remote. As a matter of fact, the nearest they ever came to each other was when they were both spectators at a football game a few years back. Of course, Mr. B had no idea that among the 70,000 people in that crowd was the man who was going to be the cause of his death. When they finally met, it was early one morning. Mr. A was driving back from opening day of trout season at the lakes. Fishing buddy was asleep in the back seat. Mr. A should have been somewhere where he could take 40 winks himself because he was bone tired. But he stayed behind the wheel because he didn't want to be late for a 9:30 plant meeting. Cold that morning, and before they started, Mr. A had taken a couple of shots of whiskey to warm him up, but it only seemed to make him sleepy. 2 or 3 times he found himself drifting off and caught it just in time. A cup of coffee, but there was no place to stop, so he just fought off his drowsiness and kept going. Mr. B was on the road that morning too. He was trying to get back from a sales trip for an early appointment with a hot prospect. There was hardly anyone on the highway at that hour, and he was making time. He had no idea that the end of his career was just around the next curve. When they actually met, Mr. A was asleep. And this once, he didn't wake up in time. He didn't wake up until 4 days later, in a little emergency hospital 75 miles from home. By that time, the hours of the important appointments were long gone. And for Mr. B, there would be no more earthly appointments, ever. Driver reaction time, the time required to see, interpret, and react, averages 2 to 3 seconds. 2 automobiles approaching one another at 50 miles an hour require no more than a quarter of a second to be converted to junk. Should a head-on collision between cars traveling at 50 miles per hour appear imminent when the cars are 300 feet apart, no effective preventive effort will be initiated before they crashed. The ensuing quarter second of destruction embroils the motorists within collapsing structures with injurious forces having a magnitude measured in tons rather than pounds. Even if there were sufficient time to brace himself, these forces completely overwhelm the motorist. These conclusions are the results of scientific collision experiments conducted by engineers at the University of California, Los Angeles, Institute of Transportation and Traffic Engineering. On a paved area several acres in extent, accidents are carefully staged with specially instrumented cars. Anthropometric dummies, designed to sustain damage which is indicative of the injuries human bodies would receive, act as motorists in the staged collisions. Safety harness and seat belts are used to determine the value of restraining devices in car accidents. The purpose of the experiments is to discover through research the injury-producing and related factors associated with automobile collisions, in order to provide a sound basis on which appropriate engineering revision of the automobile may be accomplished. Preparations for the series of head-on collisions required many months. But finally, the problem of bringing the cars together at regulated speed to crash at a precise, predetermined point was solved. One of the cars was to be under power, with a governor to maintain its desired speed. A steel cable from the rear of the powered car passed around a sheave and extended to the front end of the opposing car. Thus, the powered car would pull the opposing car toward itself. The first 6 experiments were designed to bring the cars together at speeds under 30 miles per hour. All instrumentation which had been installed in the cars was carefully checked. And the anthropometric driver and passenger dummies secured with seat belts. A camera inside one of the cars recorded a scene no human eye could see without possibility of serious injury or death. Now, the collision in slow motion. Part of the shock of impact is taken up by the collapsing metal of the 2 cars, which slows the rate of deceleration, but not enough to prevent the occupants from being thrown forward violently. While the cars are decelerating such a collision, the motorists, if unrestrained, continue on at the same speed at which they were moving before the crash occurred. A secondary collision takes place when they strike the inside parts of the automobile with a moving force of 30 Gs, or over 2 tons. Seat belts and safety harness equipment are for the purpose of stopping or minimizing this secondary collision, the collision which causes injury and death. In the under 30 miles per hour head-on collisions, the drivers were nearly all presumed to be fatalities, since their seats tore loose and they were hurled against the steering column, which in turn was being forced into the driving compartment as the car's front ends collapsed. In each case, the impact on the dummy drivers' chests represented a force of over 4,000 pounds. In the final head-on collision of the series, it was arranged for 2 cars to meet at 52 miles per hour. As before, preparations were exhaustive and time-consuming. But finally, the order was given to begin the run. Although by this time accustomed to the sight of automotive crashes, even the engineers in charge were awed by the destructive forces unleashed when these speeding vehicles came together. In both cars, the collapse of the driving compartments would have killed the drivers, for a giant vice-like grip exceeding a force of 10 tons enveloped them as the metal structures crushed in around their bodies. This approximates what happened when Mr. A and Mr. B met on the lonely early morning highway. Actually, it is all over in less than a quarter of a second. In both cars, however, the passengers can be presumed to have survived according to the probable injuries indicated, since the special seat belts, even though partially torn loose, aided in preventing fatal injury by controlling and minimizing the forces of deceleration, even though these forces exceeded 9,000 pounds. In any crash, even if they are not killed, Motorists are often severely injured by being thrown against knobs, visors, ashtray assemblies, and other protrusions inside the car. The safest interior design would include the mounting of all knobs flush with the dash surface and the elimination of all sharp edges. It is obvious that head-on collisions, particularly at high speed, are the most lethal type of automobile accident. They may all be said to result from the lack of proper attention on the part of motorists. Not only attention to actual driving situation, but attention to the car's mechanical condition or the condition of the tires, which if badly worn or damaged are apt to cause blowouts. At higher speeds, a blowout can easily deflect the car into the oncoming lane. Most freeway and turnpike curves are engineered for speeds of at least 60 miles per hour, but older highways are not. The motorist who takes these curves too fast can be forced over the center line. Passing on a narrow uphill road where opposing traffic is obscured is another easy way to invite a head-on collision. The job of operating a car safely involves much more than holding onto the wheel and pressing on the gas pedal. It involves the reliability of the all-important control component of the vehicle. This is the man or woman in the driver's seat. All of the carefully engineered parts of the car may be working perfectly, but if the critical control component is not functioning as it should, any automobile can become a destructive battering ram. If the driver is under the influence of alcohol, or pushing too hard to get somewhere when he is tired, or for any reason lets his attention wander, he takes a chance on ending up where no one wants to go. Or where no one wants to send anyone else. The emergency hospital. Or beyond. You can't control the actions of other drivers. But by giving your attention to the whole job of driving, you can avoid being the cause of meeting another motorist under the worst possible circumstances, head on, in his lane, on the highway.